Welcome to Unscripted, a podcast with no script by design. We're not following a plan, and that's exactly the point. This show is about whatever's on the minds of your hosts, Larry Lannan and Duncan Giles. We'll dig into what's happening in the world, and just as importantly, what isn't making headlines this week. So, with that, let's get started. The conversation could go anywhere because we go wherever the microphones take us. Here's Larry Lannan and Duncan Giles. I'm Lannan, he's Giles, and this is Lannan and Giles Unscripted for Friday, October 24th in 2025. Duncan Giles, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Larry. It's always good to be here.
So we feel like it's fall here in the central Indiana. Temperature has got to the freezing mark overnight, so I guess it's going to happen sometime. But Duncan, I just want to relate a short conversation that you and I had recently because we talked about, your wife coming back after a long trip to Singapore, about, how you had made sure you had all the clothes dried, the dishes done. You just wanted everything all set up for your wife. So I said, "Oh, Duncan Giles, the perfect husband." To which you quickly corrected me and said, "No, I'm not." I said, "Well, how about for a day?" You said, "How about for a couple of hours?" So I think we're going to have to get Kim's, take on this.
I would say that Kim's not exactly objective on that, but I'm still happy going with my couple of hours.
Okay, a couple of hours is where you go. Well, we have some interesting stories. Some feel good, some strange to relate to you today. As we try to do, we do give you news, but not necessarily news you would get in the mainstream media. There was a lady that recently in Seattle, Washington, went shopping, and when she went shopping, she went to a secondhand thrift store, bought some jeans. And in the jeans, you check the jeans out when you buy them. You try to see what's inside the pockets. So she found some things. She was getting ready to throw some papers away that she found in the pockets. She found a lottery ticket in the pocket that nobody had ever cashed in or used. She was ready to throw it away and said, "Well, maybe I should check this out." Duncan, that lottery ticket was worth $2.4 million.
Wow.
That lady hit the jackpot.
Wow. And the people that donated those pants are just, there's a nice probably hole in their wall where they're beating their head against it. That's unreal.
Yeah, I mean, I just imagine that. You one day you don't have it, next day you get 2.4 million minus the taxes, of course, but still, that's the gross amount you're talking about. That's a good place to start. And she was getting ready to throw it all away, but she took that extra little bit of time. So, well, I'm going to go online and check this out. Lo and behold, $2.4 million. I thought that was a good feel good story to start the podcast out.
Yeah, she probably won't have to shop at Goodwill or thrift stores anymore.
I think the thrift store days are gone for this lady, unless she wants to. I don't mind. I had a grandmother lived in Southwest Indiana, wonderful lady. Both my grandmothers were exceptional people, but what they lived through the Great Depression and learned how to do what they could with what little they had. And even after my grandfather had sold the farm and he had passed away and she had plenty of money, you see her go to the grocery store. She didn't shop any differently. So having the money it didn't make any difference. She still lived the same way she lived before she had the money. And I think a lot of people are like that.
Oh, especially like you said, the older generation, the greatest generation, so to speak, the ones that went through the Depression that saw that and were always worried that something like that could happen again. So they wanted to keep as much money. So no, that's an excellent point that that happens. But I've also seen in an old neighborhood, we had some people that had won some money from the lottery, bought a very nice house, and They eventually sold it probably a year and a half or so later because they felt they didn't fit into the neighborhood. A lot of the neighbors, they were different folks. They did different things. They always said, you've always treated us nice, but a lot of these others are just looking down on us because of how we are and, the things that we do. And the money didn't change them. But they felt, trying to move up. It wasn't quite the Beverly Hillbillies type thing, but a much more minor league version of that.
There have been many books written about lottery winners, and it is amazing, Duncan, how many of them end up in bankruptcy.
Yep.
They don't know how to handle that kind of money. They blow it. Another interesting study has been done on professional athletes that make millions of dollars and end up in bankruptcy, later in life. They just don't know how to. I mean, many of them do handle their money well, so don't get me wrong, but there are many more than you would imagine that completely blow that huge windfall they received as athletes because maybe when you're playing sports you never think it's going to end, and it does one day. You don't make that kind of money anymore. So
Well,
anyway.
part of that is they're looking at, like you said, the money's never going to end. But part of it is also a lot of times, well, I'll have my mother, brother, or part of my posse, manage my money. And a lot of those folks either don't know what they're doing or skimming or such have you. Because back when I was associated with the Pacers, you know, there was no such thing really as, you didn't have a group around you. You didn't have that much money, so you didn't have a posse or anything like that. There were a couple of players at different times where I was their posse. That's pretty sad.
Oh dear.
Uh,
And how much money did you make being part of that posse, by the way?
let's see, zero.
Thought you'd say $1.95, but that's all
Yeah,
right.
it just depends. Sometimes they pick up meals or something of that nature, but actual money or handling their money or anything like that, absolutely not. But I think now a lot of these athletes, for the most part, are getting smarter and having the people who are handling their money or their finances, having somebody check on them because of all the things that, like you said, have happened over the years.
Well, we're going to talk a little more about athletes and money later, but let me move to another issue. This is the other side of the coin. There's a man in Pennsylvania who did what most of us do every so many years, went to the license branch, needed to get his driver's license renewed. The employees at the license branch told him they could not extend or renew his driver's license. You know why? Because their records showed that he died in 2018.
I was going to say something in the records. Yep.
And he's still trying to prove to the government he's still alive 7 months later. This is, we've all dealt with bureaucracy. You and I have worked within bureaucracies and we know how they work. And if they're done the right way, you find ways to fix problems like that quickly. Well, this poor fellow is still considered dead by the state of Pennsylvania. So let's move on to another because I've as a reporter, I have covered many school board elections right here in Fishers, where I write my local news blog. I think it's either 6 or 7 school board elections here locally that I have covered, interviewed candidates, covered school board members once they're elected, that kind of thing. In Wyoming, they've got a town in Wyoming where they elected a school board member with 52% of the vote. Do you know what the name of this school board member is?
Hard telling.
Logic First. This Wyoming town elected an AI chatbot to the school board. They
Well,
elected it.
no, knowing some of the school board members I've seen over the years, and I'm sure that you've interacted with, that may not have been the worst choice.
And here's the other part that I find interesting. Of course, people are starting to challenge this in court. But in the meantime, Duncan, this AI chatbot is an official member of this school board. So I'm trying to envision, what do they do? Do they have a laptop sitting there to allow this chatbot to vote? Ask
That would be the
questions?
only thing I could think of is that, they're basically having to type in everything that they're discussing and have the chatbot weigh in on it or vote or whatever it might be. That's yeah, it's getting to the point where it's getting serious when we're talking about AI and all the implications of that.
So we've talked a lot about the dangers and the promise of AI, which there's both, to be sure.
Yep.
But my goodness, serving on a school board, I did never imagine that. And the funniest part is the people in Wyoming elected the chatbot. Now, how did this happen? I'd like to know more about this story. I didn't get all the details. Maybe if I
Yeah,
could.
I'm imagining that some of the people are voting, going, "Oh yeah, let's vote for the chatbot as a joke," and then all of a sudden, oh, 52% later, wait, what? Everybody,
Yeah, the
majority
joke's
voted for him as a joke.
yeah, the joke is on them now that they've got
Exactly.
a school board member doing this.
Yeah, I would imagine that there's something in the Wyoming state laws that you have to be. Well, there may or may not be that you have to be a human to be elected to the school board.
So anyway, we'll keep an eye on this. If we get an update on this story, by the way, I did check up on the nuns we've talked about in Austria that
Yep.
broke out of the care home. They're still there, as far as I know, and the police haven't evicted them. Just so you have an update on that. I've checked every now and then. Haven't seen any change in that story. But here's a story. A lot of people like to protest what's going on in local government. As somebody who's covered local governments around Indiana, I've seen lots of situations where citizens will protest something happening locally. Well, in Kentucky, there was a man who decorated his lawn with fake body bags labeled mayor and judge. He was protesting what city officials were doing is some kind of a utility dispute going on locally, and he didn't like the way the mayor or this judge was handling it, so he put a fake body bag out in his lawn tagged mayor and judge. So the neighbors thought this was real.
Yep.
These were real body bags. So they called the police, and the police charged this man with terrorist threatening.
I can see that. I mean, I'm all for free speech, freedom of speech, and things of that nature, but that comes awfully close to you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. You can't, basically you're threatening. You are, by saying this, okay, I'm putting the mayor and the judge in a body bag. You can't threaten people like that, especially in such an overt display on your yard. Well, it was meant as a joke. Okay, what kind of joke do you use that you go out and get body bags? There's intent there.
I don't think there was a joke. I think this guy was angry with the judge, and the
Yeah,
mayor wanted to, in a very extreme way, show his displeasure. And of course, the police, in a very extreme way, charged him with a crime. So, I mean, you cross a line, you pay a price. Although I kind of wonder if he'll ever really pay a price for this once it gets before a judge and whatever.
now he's going to have to hire an attorney to defend him, and that's going to be a price in and of itself.
Well, he may get a public defender on this one. Let's move on to the next. I've got a couple of others here that I think are worth mentioning. One thing that happens, it's interesting, Duncan, that for years when I was driving in the state of Indiana, U-turns were illegal. You couldn't do a U-turn anywhere. Well, now U-turns are legal unless you have a sign that says it's not. And that's
Yep.
basically what Indiana law says. A lot of other states have. First time I ever made a legal U-turn was in the state of Nevada when I was renting a car out in Las Vegas before they changed the law in Indiana. And I thought, isn't this neat? I can make a legal U-turn. Well, and I haven't figured out where this is, but this story seems to be legit. It's a foreign source, so I couldn't get the exact place in the U.S. where this happened. But there was a police department who saw a police officer saw a vehicle making an illegal U-turn, pulled it over, and issued a ticket for an illegal U-turn. This was a driverless car. So the car made an automated decision to make an illegal U-turn. So my only question is, who do you make the ticket out to? Elon Musk?
Yeah, I was going to say you're going to have to do that to, whatever company is using I would assume for a delivery or something of that nature, whatever company is doing that for that. But yeah, that's very interesting that if there's signage posted that you can't make a U-turn, that the AI, again, we go back to AI, the AI didn't recognize that and still made the illegal U-turn. So uh, just goes to show that, again, as we've said, AI can be very beneficial, but there are some dangers to it, and it's not perfect. God knows it is not perfect.
Well, I have seen a lot of people in the tech industry. We got some tech people here in Fishers. We've got some high tech companies and others in government who 5 years ago told me by this time we would all be using driverless cars. I was a bit of a skeptic. Okay, more than a bit of a skeptic, because I knew this technology had promise, but I'd also seen, what's happening else. I mean, I think it was in Phoenix, Arizona, where a poor woman on a bicycle was run over and killed by a driverless car they were testing. I mean that should not happen, and that sort of put a stop to a lot of the testing that was going on. There are still parts of the U.S. where you will find driverless cars. You'll find like an Uber Lyft type operation using them. You will find other operations in very specific areas where it's being tested. But Duncan, I don't think that all of the safety issues have been handled, particularly in very crowded urban areas.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's still in its infancy. It almost goes back to when cars were first starting to be used and horses were the majority. You'd have horses get spooked by the cars and things of that nature. So it's still very small. Now, myself, I was promised flying cars when I was young, when I was a youngster. Oh, by this time we'll have flying cars. I'm still waiting for my flying car to be invented. I don't know what's going on there.
Well, we do have flying pizza deliveries.
Yeah, but that's drones. I'm talking about able to be flying cars and get out of the traffic. Now there'd be different traffic, and can you imagine some of the if we did have flying cars the way some people drive now? Um, wow.
Well,
It's one thing to have an accident on the ground. How about if you have an accident a couple 100 feet in the air?
so you, when you were a kid, you believed in the Jetsons.
You mean it? Okay, just because our we had a one of the robot vacuums, we named it Rosie. We named it Rosie after
Oh,
the
the
maid in the
Jetsons. Yeah.
Jetsons.
But I have had the same thought. I mean, we'd have to have pretty good technology to keep these things away from each other. If people started flying the way they drive, I am really worried about flying vehicles. My last news story of this week. Do you remember earlier in the week when there was a huge glitch with the online Amazon cloud? For
Yep.
those of you who are not aware of it or maybe forgotten about it already, a lot of people use Amazon cloud as their storage area, or they use that as their method for their technology. Like I think a financial institution I use got messed over with this when Amazon had a problem, or I guess you'd call it virtually an outage. But it's interesting how we have. I joked about the Internet of Things a while back about how it wasn't really as pervasive as people thought. Well, I didn't realize this, but there are people who have smart beds and they fold up and they go back down and they do so based on computer commands that they essentially get. I guess because of this Amazon web outage, there were people who were stuck in the upright position in their beds.
That's interesting because having we have a smart bed, and one of the things you do have is a remote. You can use the remote to go up and down as well. So I'm not sure what happened there, but I can tell you when we were having these outages, now that I'm retired, officially retired as of the end of last month, and spending more time at home, we have a very smart home. We have the echoes out there and all that to turn on lights, turn off lights, things of that nature. And while the outage was going on, they were not working. So I had to go into an app to turn on a light because it was all set up via the system to be voice activated, and those echoes were not working because the Amazon cloud was down.
Let's move on because I've got a couple of issues I want to talk about before we wrap this up. The first thing I want to talk about is what's made news in the NBA. because of the latest gambling, and these are allegations. Nobody's been convicted yet, but there are serious allegations and indictments out there. I want to go back to a couple of things. Number one, I'm old enough to remember when every major professional sports league in America disdained gambling. And if
Yep.
you were an owner or a player or an official and you had any kind of association with gambling, they would suspend you. They would fine you. One of the great examples was Paul Hornung, one of the great Green Bay Packers, got in trouble over this. And well, if you look back on it, what he did wasn't that egregious, especially if you look at what's going on today. But what really changed things, I think, Duncan, was when the Supreme Court said, "Hey, states, if you want to legalize gambling, you can do it." That opened the floodgates. And the owners of professional sports went from being Attila the Hun on enforcing gambling restrictions to saying, "Oh, there's money here." And
Yep.
now you see all the advertising that pours in supporting these sports teams, supporting the broadcasters who are paying rights for these sports teams. So this money is all coming in to the NBA directly or indirectly. And the NBA is not the only one. It's all the major sports that are experiencing all this money. And the first glimmer that I saw that there was a problem, and people still forget this, and it just happened a few years ago, was the scandal surrounding Tim Donaghy. Remember that? Tim Donaghy was
Yep.
an official,
Absolutely.
a referee with the NBA. I'm not going to get into all. There were several really good podcasts. I followed about a 7-part podcast a former Los Angeles Times sports writer did on the whole Tim Donaghy thing. And really, he got into the whole officiating situation in the NBA. It's strange how the league office deals with their refs. And what Donaghy did was, he paid a price for that. And what he did, he actually impacted the point spread at the end of a game when a game's already been decided. That's basically what he did. And a
Right.
referee,
Right.
the fouls you choose to call and not call. Well, this new scandal that's just come out has two different interesting aspects to it. We have one NBA coach that's accused of being involved in poker games that were apparently, how should I put it, fixed by certain criminal organizations. That's the allegation anyway. But he's also been implicated again. These are charges, allegations that he was involved in like letting gamblers know when there were player issues. For instance, one player is accused of letting gamblers know LeBron James wasn't going to play in a game when it wasn't publicly known yet for the Los Angeles Lakers. We have another player who, you can bet an over/under on how many points a player scores. This player faked an injury to make sure he was under on that point total to make sure the people he was with made a lot of money on their wagers. These are really serious issues. But Duncan, here's what I think, and I'd really like to get your take on this. When you get into bed with the gambling industry, these things are going to happen. It was not a matter of whether these things were going to happen. It's really a matter of when something like this was going to happen. And I fear we'll see more of this. And I think this will taint professional sports. And the NBA, yes, that's what we're talking about today. It could be any professional sport tomorrow that gets tarnished with this broad brush. I mean, you have actually been around NBA locker rooms. You have a little more perspective. Although it was a long time ago, you have some idea what might be going on with some of these players and the way they're thinking. I would really like to get your take on this.
Yeah, it's been something that has been underground for a long time and not that prevalent. And now it's becoming more. And what, people go, well, these NBA players, they make all this money. So why would they, jeopardize their careers or these huge salaries by doing this? Well, when you get towards the tail end of the career and they're making the NBA minimum, which is still a heck of a lot of money, but it's not anything near that they used to, and they want to keep up their lifestyle, so they're looking for other ways. And the way that I think a lot of them justify it in their heads is, well, like you said, I'm doing an under. I'm not harming the team. I'm just trying to make sure that I make some money without harming the team. And that's what they're trying to justify it as. Um, but it's such a huge deal. I mean, you take a look back at Pete Rose being banned from baseball for basically betting on things where he had inside information, but he was betting on his team. To my knowledge, he never bet against his team. And I'm not a defender of what he did, but it's just one of those things where, yeah, you get a lot of information. Somebody's tweaked an ankle and they're going to be playing on it, and they're not going to be 100%, or, like they do now where they have rest games, that may or may not be announced to the public. And the way that a lot of this works is if there's a lot, it used to be, if there was a lot of money put down on something, especially towards right before a game or an event, then it would be very suspicious because what's making this big swing, and people would look at it. But now, because it's so dispersed with so many different ways that you can, bet online and things of that nature, it's much easier to hide.
I gotta
In
say,
my way
I
of
gotta
thinking.
say, I gotta say one thing about Pete Rose. I'm a big Reds fan. There are a lot of Reds fans that are apologists for Rose. I am not an apologist for Pete Rose. You know, uh, you and I studied tax law, and what he did structuring those cash payments was not legal. Okay, he
Absolutely.
he paid a price for that and went to jail for that, and he was convicted. Now the other thing is, yes, you can say he only bet on his team to win, but Duncan, these gamblers all have networks and they all know what's going on. When he chose not to bet on the game, they knew that too.
That's
So
true as well.
just because he never bet on his team to lose doesn't really mean anything, in my view. I think well, they knew when he wasn't betting on the game at all. And when that was the case, he didn't think his team was going to win. So I am not an apologist I'm sorry he's passed away. He was a great player. I have a lot of respect for him as a player, but as a manager and what he did in the area of gambling, I mean, he knew what the rules were and he broke them. Now, yeah, today would it be the same? I don't know. I mean, I still what he did probably wouldn't go today, even with what's going on with gambling. But no, I appreciate your perspective on this because I think you've kind of known some of these players. The other part of this I think we don't know yet, and I wonder about do these crime syndicates or whoever was involved with these players, do you think they maybe had something on these players?
Well, that's the other thing is once you get in bed with them one time, that's all it takes. Then they can say, well, if you don't do this or you don't do that, we will expose you. And so, it's like getting sucked into a whirlpool. You think you're safe, you're on the outside, you've just touched it, but no, now you're in it and you can't get out. So I think that's very possible that once you start down this road, there's no going back.
That's
Um,
one other issue I want to bring up before we wrap this up, and that's we talk about the government shutdown. You and I are retired federal employees, so we do have some interest in this. A couple of things that I've seen, and I'd like to get your take on. Number one is that I guess what I understand, Trump administration did pay the troops in their last payday. They actually paid them. But there is some question about whether the administration, in fact, had the legal right to do it. I'm not against people getting paid, but did they have the legal right to do it? Because during a shutdown, my understanding was, the government does not have the legal right to pay people. So that's going to be in the courts and all that. And if they can pay the troops, why can't they pay everybody else? I mean, then we get into that whole slippery slope. There are some people in Congress who've been quietly talking to reporters about a couple of different things that very different. First of all, there have been a few people in Congress talking to reporters saying, I think what we'll do is just continue this government shutdown all throughout the end of the calendar year. I thought to myself, okay, that is fantasy land because people are going to start to feel it, and they're already starting to feel this,
yep.
and they're going to feel it even more. I don't think they're going to get away with that. But there's another one that's even more interesting because there's a handful of Republican House members that apparently are talking to reporters saying they're just fed up with the current situation and they're ready to talk to the Democrats about and it's very close in the House. It just takes a few people to switch on this. saying we want to do two things. One, we want to reopen the government with some bipartisan solution, and then we would like to actually release the Epstein files. So, if it was something like that were to happen, that could end it all overnight. But anyway, I'd like to get your take on some of these strange things that are happening with this current government shutdown.
Yeah, to me, this is, we've both seen a lot of shutdowns. This is totally senseless to me. I understand the Republicans saying, okay, we just want a clean funding bill. That's all we want. And the Democrats are holding the line and basically saying, no, we want, you came back and had a special session in July so you could do the big, beautiful bill and all that, but yet you won't convene in regular order to extend the premiums for those folks who are on the ACA for the insurance subsidies. And they're starting to hit now. People are starting to see their stuff double. And I think that's a huge part of the issue. And, I feel for everybody that is being impacted by this, either directly or indirectly, and folks not having paychecks is hurting. I mean, there are already people that are starting to hurt now. And, it's funny when you say, okay, the president's paying the troops, or he's paying this group, or he's paying that group, out of what funds? And, back when I was starting as a chapter president, we had what were called districts. You remember those?
Oh, sure.
And
Yeah, I remember him well.
yeah,
Yes.
talking to the person who was in charge of the financial person in charge of the district was explaining the budget process to me. How they did things and things that, and how they moved money around and did this and did that. And I looked at her at the end of that and I said, okay, I've just got two comments. I said, one, this reminds me of a street corner New York 3-card Monte game with what you're doing. And the second thing is don't we put people away for moving money like this? And she just sort of looked at me and said, I have no comment about any of this. And that's the way I was drawn to when they said, oh, we're going to pay these people, but not these people. We're going to move money out of this into this. And there's just nothing, no basis in law for it. And that's the thing that gets me about this administration. There is so much that's being done with absolutely no basis in law. And you saw 7 to 8 million people protest this kind of thing over the weekend.
It's interesting to me that, and again, I cover local government school boards. I'll get people who are well schooled in accounting practices in the private sector, and they'll try to figure out what's going on with the local schools where they don't understand the state. For instance, in Indiana, the state of Indiana prescribes the accounting system. It's not the same accounting system private sector uses or even
Right.
nonprofits use. So what you're seeing in government accounting is whatever the federal government decides they want it to be. And if you did the same thing in the private sector, you might be behind bars. I mean, that's literally the case. And it's legal for them because they made it legal. And is it the best system to use? Probably not. Any final thought before we wrap this up?
Well, yep, we're just starting Fall Classic, the World Series. I think it's going to be a tough one, but I'm hoping for my Dodgers to win it in 6 games is my hope and prediction.
Fox Sports, which has the rights to the World Series, their biggest nightmare was Toronto versus Milwaukee.
Yeah, the
You have
small markets.
a Canadian team versus a small market American team. So they would have loved the Dodgers Seattle. They'd have been fine with that.
Yep.
But now with the Canadian team in there, I think they're going to worry about the audience. Although the World Series does get a good audience, it pumps things up. If it had been, for instance, New York and L.A., that kind of, or Boston and L.A., something like that. But I'm not going to shed any tears for any TV network. I think they're doing just fine. I don't think
Yeah,
they're.
and for anybody that says, "Oh, you're a Dodger front runner" or something like that, I've been a Dodger fan for probably about 55 or so years. So front
I
runner
mean,
is not me.
did you care about the Brooklyn Dodgers? That's the.
Well, I wasn't around quite that long.
I didn't think you were around that time, but the history is there, right, Duncan?
Absolutely, absolutely. Ebbets Field and the old Brooklyn Dodgers, and getting beat by the Yankees in the World Series almost constantly until 1955. Absolutely.
Yeah, the old Subway Series between the
Yep.
Dodgers, and then it became the cross across the continent World Series when they went to Los Angeles. Okay, Duncan, thanks a lot. If all goes well, we will return next week for another edition of Lannan and Giles Unscripted. We have one ask for you as the audience. Like and subscribe to this podcast. We appreciate it. Duncan and Larry will be back soon with another episode. In the meantime, this is Unscripted.